In the headlines, veteran corruption fighter Kim Jin-tae prepares for a confirmation hearing as new Prosecutor General. This in the face of a daunting task to reunite the divided prosecution over a controversial probe into the spy agency's election meddling. Korea's economy appears well on a path to recovery, with this year's growth expected to approach 3%. We take an in-depth look at the state of the economy. Plus, with escalating verbal skirmishes between Asia's two largest economies threatening regional peace, Korea appears to make sure Tokyo seeks Seoul's consent when trying to engage its self-defense forces on the Korean peninsula. With these stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Monday, October 28th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with the Korean Prime Minister's first address to the nation. The Prime Minister Chung Hong-won assured the public of the government's determination to reveal the truth about the alleged election interference by the spy agency, as well as the country's path to economic recovery. Hwang Sung-hee has our top story.
In his first special statement to the nation on Monday, Prime Minister Chung Hong-won said President Park Geun-hye did not receive the assistance of the National Intelligence Service during last year's presidential election.
The president did not receive any help from the National Intelligence Service, and she has made it clear from the start that she will take whatever actions are necessary to uncover the truth.
Lawmakers have been wrangling over suspicions the spy agency launched an online smear campaign ahead of last year's close election to sway public opinion in favor of then-presidential candidate Park. The Prime Minister also touched on the economy, which has recently shown signs of recovery. The economy has expanded for 2 consecutive quarters, and the number of new workers has been hovering at 400,000 for the second straight month. Saying that now is the time to focus on economic recovery, the Prime Minister called for cooperation between the government and lawmakers.
The National Assembly and the government must work together for a swift passage of pending legislation aimed at stimulating the economy and improving the lives of the people.
Prime Minister Chung said the government will take seriously the issues raised during an ongoing parliamentary audit and come up with practical solutions to the problems. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And while the country is sinking further into political disarray due to an ongoing feud over the spy agency's election meddling, President Park Geun-hye has tapped a new top prosecutor, Kim Jin-tae, former deputy chief of the Supreme Prosecutor's Office.
He may be well known as a veteran corruption fighter, but as our Kim Yeon-ji reports, he faces a number of daunting tasks ahead.
Prosecutor-General nominee Kim Jin-tae is walking into an organization in crisis. But it's not the first time. He was brought in to lead the agency last year after its chief resigned in disgrace over a series of corruption and sex scandals involving a number of prosecutors and several failed attempts to reform the organization. As acting Prosecutor General, Kim moved quickly to restore the organization's tarnished image. Now, Kim has been given a second chance to lead the office, which is again in disarray. His predecessor, Choi Dong-wook, resigned a month ago amid allegations that he fathered a child out of wedlock. The divisions within the prosecution widened last week after a televised dispute between Yoon Sung-yeol, the lead prosecutor who spearheaded a probe into the spy agency's alleged meddling in last year's presidential election, and his superior, Cho Young-gon. Yoon claimed that his probe into the spy agency was undermined amid external pressure, while Cho said that Yoon had failed to follow proper procedure in his handling of the case. The Prosecutor General nominee is facing the task of cleaning up the prosecution and mitigating an internal strife over the spy agency controversy. The main opposition Democratic Party questioned President Park's choice because of Kim's ties to Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun. It claimed that Kim's nomination is part of the presidential office of 청와대's plan to take control of the prosecution.
The prosecution has the power to probe the National Intelligence Service, but it is as if the NIS is investigating the prosecution now. The prosecution must clear people's suspicions into the NIS scandal.
But the ruling Saenuri party urged the opposition party to focus on pending bills.
The Democratic Party must shift its focus away from the spy agency scandal and work with the ruling party to promptly pass bills aimed at reviving the economy.
The confirmation hearing for the Prosecutor-General nominee will be held at the National Assembly next month, and it is sure to revolve around the question of whether Kim can ensure the prosecution's neutrality in the face of the investigation into the spy agency. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Amid growing concerns over the local currency's steady appreciation against the U.S. dollar, the Korean government says it is determined to take steps to measure and curb the excessive foreign capital outflows.
But will the government's actions be enough to stabilize the upward pressure on the won? Connie Kim tells us more.
A high-ranking official from the Ministry of Strategy and Finance says the strengthening of the won could potentially derail the Korean economy from its path to recovery. Speaking on condition of anonymity, he said last Wednesday's intervention in the foreign exchange market reflects the government's determination to stabilize the Korean currency. On Wednesday, when the won hit a 5-year high of 1,054 won against the dollar during intraday trading, officials from both the Bank of Korea and the Ministry of Strategy and Finance verbally intervened in the market to push the won lower to close above the psychologically important 1,060 level. Foreign investors have recently snapped up Korean stocks and bonds, which they see as a safe bet, promising a relatively high return, thereby pushing up the Korean currency. In the 3 months of September, the Korean won rose by 6.3%, the second highest margin of increase among currencies of all the G20 countries. Both Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok and Bank of Korea Governor Kim Jung-soo last week, reaffirming that the government will slow down the pace of the won's appreciation, said measures being considered include taxing foreigners investing in local bonds and requiring hedging against currency fluctuations. But many experts say such government steps may not be enough to stabilize the won given the foreign appetite for Korean stocks and global economic uncertainties, including the timing of the planned tapering of U.S. stimulus program. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The Korean economy is widely believed to be moving into a recovery phase, with major indices, including the real GDP and exports, pointing to signs of growing confidence.
For the details, we're now joined live by Arirang's Hwang Sung-hee here in the studio. So, Jie, let's start off with the recent third quarter GDP figures. Experts seem to be pleased.
Yes, indeed. The Bank of Korea said Friday that the nation's gross domestic product rose 3.3% in the July to September period from a year earlier, the first time that growth has topped 3% since the end of 2011. The economy grew 1.1% compared to the second quarter, when it gained at the same pace. That is significant because the economy's quarter-on-quarter growth remained below 1% for more than 2 years until early this year. Perhaps even more noteworthy is the fact that the recovery largely came from a rise in facility investment and improving domestic demand. This is encouraging as the Korean economy relies heavily on exports and less so on domestic demand.
Richie, we also cannot leave out the effect of government spending, which will, of course, run out later this year. Could this have a negative impact on the Korean economic growth eventually?
Korea's construction investment, mainly driven by government policies, as you said, rose 2.7%, serving as a major engine for the third quarter growth. Experts say, however, that the Korean economy will likely reach the central bank's growth projection of 3.8% next year, as the growth coming from government spending could be replaced by a recovery of the global economy next year.
As world economy turn around next year, I think Korea will maintain the export growth, will achieve like a 3.8 growth in 2014.
But exports did drop in the third quarter despite the other good news. What's the reason there?
Well, the nation's exports, which account for half of the nation's GDP, dropped, as you said, 0.9% from the previous quarter, following a 1.8% expansion in the second quarter. The central bank explained that the drop was a result of there being fewer working days in September due to the national holiday Chuseok. And while some say the recent trend of the strong Korean won could hurt the nation's exports, experts are not as sure.
Compared to the past, the foreign exchange rate has less of an impact on Korea's economy. That's because the nation's large companies that lead exports have spread their production facilities around the world.
Archie, so is Korea expecting a sustainable upward trend, or is it just a phase?
Well, majority are saying that the Korean economy is showing signs of escaping from the low growth trend it has been showing. Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok, in fact, has said that if the Korean economy maintains its 1.1% growth in the fourth quarter, it could post a growth rate of 2.9% this year, which would exceed the Finance Ministry's earlier forecast of 2.7%. The central bank also said last week that economic performance in the third quarter is in line with its forecast of 2.8% growth for all of this year. Still, experts say that the U.S. budget standoff and the planned stimulus tapering could have a negative impact on the Korean economy next year.
Okay, looks like there's a rosier outlook there. Hope we can have some more of that. Thank you so much, Jay.
You're welcome.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise. Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature, circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Came on trying to cover up the South. And over now to a verbal skirmish between Asia's two largest economies. The rhetoric between China and Japan is becoming more belligerent, with Beijing even using the term act of war in response to Tokyo's plan to shoot down any foreign drones that refuse to leave its airspace. Our Jin-ju has more.
The territorial dispute between China and Japan is taking on an increasingly militaristic tone. The Japan Self-Defense Forces held a military review near Tokyo on Sunday, featuring some 4,000 troops and hundreds of armored vehicles and fighter jets. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe attended the ceremony and emphasized the importance of a strong self-defense forces.
Security threats against Japan are becoming real, including the threat posed by North Korea's ballistic missiles.
So while it may seem North Korea is the reason behind Japan's push to strengthen its military capability, watchers say Abe's comments are actually aimed at China. Abe reiterated that he will exercise the right to collective self-defense, even if it means a review of the government's constitutional interpretation. On Saturday, the Chinese government angrily responded to a Japanese media report which said Abe had approved a plan to shoot down any foreign drones that ignored warnings to leave Japanese airspace.
If Japan does what it said and resorts to enforcement measures like shooting down aircraft, that is a serious provocation to us. It is an act of war. We will surely undertake decisive decision to strike back.
In protest against Tokyo's latest moves, China sent 4 military jets to waters near Okinawa for 3 straight days from Friday to Sunday. Japan scrambled fighter jets in response. Tensions between the two nations are expected to escalate further over the next couple of weeks, as China is currently conducting its largest ever naval exercise in the Western Pacific. Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea, for its part, has not weighed in on the tensions between Beijing and Tokyo. But a foreign ministry did reiterate a stance it first made back in 1997, that Japan will need Korea's consent should it want to engage its self-defense forces on the Korean peninsula. Our Song Ji-san reports.
South Korea has voiced concern that Tokyo could expand its military presence to the Korean peninsula without prior approval from Seoul, in case of a contingency involving North Korea. The South Korean constitution defines North Korea as its territory, while Japan views it as a separate sovereign state. With that as a foundation, Seoul has maintained its stance towards Tokyo that the Japanese government must ask for Seoul's permission should it seek to exercise its self-defense forces on the peninsula. This statement was first made back in 1997, following a joint declaration on security signed by Tokyo and Washington in 1996. The two countries agreed to achieve a more peaceful and stable security environment in the Asia-Pacific region through a joint effort. Korea's foreign ministry also at that time told the American and Japanese ambassadors to Seoul that any action or move that could affect the sovereignty or safety of Korea must be discussed beforehand between Korea, the US, and Japan. Korea's defense ministry also banned Japan's self-defense forces from conducting any military drills on the Korean peninsula. The South Korean government has reportedly asked Washington this time around to make it clear to Japan that it needs approval from Seoul on issues related to its sovereignty and the Korean peninsula. 송지선, Arirang News.
Well, starting next year, illegal fishing in waters shared by Korea and China will not have a leg to stand on. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries said Monday that the two countries have agreed to combat the chronic problem by running a joint patrol ship 5 to 6 times a year during the high fishing season and set up checkpoints to inspect the amount of fish they've caught. The two countries would also set up an automatic identification system that allows Korean authorities to identify and locate Chinese fishing boats from a distance. The Seoul and Beijing renew their fisheries agreements every year, but Korea continues to struggle with Chinese boats fishing illegally in Korean waters.
The spying scandal between the United States and Germany has deepened with new claims that President Barack Obama knew his country was monitoring the German chancellor's phone calls. Washington's National Security Agency denied the report, but as our Hwang Sung-hee explains, more revelations are on their way.
In yet another bombshell in the widening U.S. bugging scandal, the White House acknowledged it knew of the spying programs on world leaders this summer, but said it quickly ordered the National Security Agency to stop its activities. The Wall Street Journal reported on Monday that the NSA had kept the wiretap activities from President Obama for years. That would contradict a separate report by German newspaper Bild am Sonntag, which quoted U.S. intelligence sources as saying that National Security Agency Chief Keith Alexander briefed President Barack Obama on a wiretapping operation against Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2010 and that Obama agreed to let it continue. It was reported last week that Obama had told Merkel over the phone that he had not been aware of the bugging. The Weekly went on to say that leaked NSA documents show Merkel's phone has appeared on a list of spying targets since 2002. These new revelations are sure to stir up more controversy, even though the NSA has denied the newspaper's claims. Meanwhile, Korea wants to know whether any Korean presidents were among the 35 world leaders who had their phone calls allegedly tapped in 2006 after Glenn Greenwald, the former columnist for The Guardian newspaper, said last week that more revelations about the NSA surveillance activities were coming. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Back here in the nation, this week, Korea is celebrating its cultural and historic link throughout Asia with a 3-day festival themed The Humanities on the Silk Road Then and Now. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won brings us this report from the southern city of Gyeongju.
The World Humanities Culture Festival kicked off on Monday in the ancient city of Gyeongju with a group of world-class scholars and students in attendance. Under the theme of the Humanities on the Silk Road, Then and Now, the 3-day festival is an extension of the Istanbul Gyeongju World Culture Expo held in Istanbul, Turkey last month.
Asia is home to diverse cultures, and each region has engaged in cultural exchange with the others. The study of the Silk Road is about such exchanges, and the history of Korea is closely linked to the Silk Road. I will lecture on the cultural exchanges between Korea and the Silk Road countries, focusing on exchanges involving both people and products.
Co-organized by the Education Ministry and the National Research Foundation of Korea, the event is in line with the government's recent efforts to promote the humanities as an area of study that facilitates a deeper understanding of life and all other cultural creations. The humanities have been given new prominence under the Park Geun-hye administration, which has targeted cultural enrichment as one of its key national goals.
As science and society advance, the demand for humanities is also growing, because more people have begun to ask questions about the meaning of life, and they have a stronger desire for the pursuit of happiness.
The three-day event combines cultural performances, such as this rare concert by 가야금 master and composer Hwang Sung-hee, with academic seminars and lectures. This year's Humanities Week also kicked off on Monday. The 7-day celebration features a host of forums, lectures, and events nationwide, giving the public a closer look at the humanities in all its forms. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, Gyeongju.
The Korean series continued on with Game 4 at TIME NEWS Stadium in Seoul on Monday night.
And Stephen Che joins us for the results of the game. Stephen.
Hey guys, Game 4 came a day after the visiting Samsung Lions eked out a win to close the gap by a game. Now let's get straight to the highlights. With the Tusan Bears up in the series 2-1, would they extend their lead or would the Lions come roaring back to tie it up? Now we go on to the first. The Bears' Choi Jun-suk, he doubles to score the first run in. A sac fly comes in later. It's 2-0 Tusan. Now the Bears' Lee Jae-woo, he's in control. He strikes out 8 on 2 hits in 5 innings worked. Meanwhile, Samsung's bats can't produce. They end up with just a run on 4 hits, and the Tusan Bears go on to win this one with a final score of 2-1 and go up in the series 3-1. Now heading to the pitch, veteran fullback Lee Young-pyo has played in his last match. The MLS's Vancouver Whitecaps won in their last game of the season 3-0 with a hat-trick supplied by Camilo Sanvezo. But Lee was the man of the match as the home fans chanted his name throughout, a fitting end to his 12-year career. Now the 36-year-old, however, is not done with the sport. He's planning to join the Whitecaps front office from next season. Now staying with football and coming closer to home, let's talk about the men's national team. The Korea Football Association announced that South Korea and Switzerland will take part in a friendly on November 15th at Seoul World Cup Stadium. The Swiss are ranked 7th in the world. And days later, on the 19th, South Korea will likely face 19th ranked Russia in a friendly in the United Arab Emirates. And now finishing off on the hard court, the FIBA Asia Championships for women has opened in Thailand, and South Korea is off to a great start. In the first game versus China, a buzzer-beating shot gave them the 72-70 edge. Meanwhile, in their second game, they steamrolled India 109-62. Now that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
The week got off to a chilly start here in Seoul before it finally warmed up a bit in the afternoon.
Yes, but I hear tomorrow is going to be a gloomy day. For details, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung. Bo-kyung.
Good evening, Sean and Ji-hye. It will be a gloomy day in the central regions where showers are forecast tomorrow afternoon. Moving on to our satellite map, we are at the edge of a high pressure system from the East Sea, which is why clouds have begun to move in. Now, a heads up for those of you in the central regions. Although there should only be about 5 millimeters of precipitation, the showers will be accompanied by strong winds and thunder. Otherwise, tomorrow's morning numbers are expected to rise a couple of degrees compared to today. However, the big temperature gaps of about 10 to 15 degrees will continue. Taking a look at tomorrow's temperatures, Seoul's morning low makes it to 10 degrees with a high of 16. Meanwhile, cities down south should hit the low 20s. Moving on, Daejeon drops to 4 degrees before reaching 19 in the afternoon. All the while, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang should top out at 19 and 12 degrees respectively. After tomorrow's showers, we should have typical autumn days for the rest of the week. That's all for now, but join me for another update after midnight.
Thanks, Po-kyung. And that's our broadcast on this Monday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.